Welcome. I'm Hoshonda Sanders with Bookstr, and I'm here with DaMaris B. Hill, author of A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing, The Incarceration of African American Women from Harriet Tubman to Sandra Bland, which is a poetry collection that is out later this month. And this is the first segment of Bookstr Diversity, which we will do again next week. I wanted to just get started, and thank you so much for joining us, DaMaris.
Hoshonda, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm very grateful.
Yes, this is it's a beautiful book. I'm really excited for folks to read it. And I wanted to start with a quote from the preface, and I know that there's a poem that you want to read as well. And it says that this book is a love letter to women who've been denied their humanity. Every time I call a name in this book, presume that the person who bears the name is loved. And it's such a lovely quote, and there are lots of really lovely quotes, so I won't spoil it for folks so that they can go and order the book. But I wanted to start by asking you if when you wrote that, you thought that also included you.
I think it did include me, if not directly an affectionate love, but during the past several years of cultural shifts, I needed to learn how to live in a society of hate. Mm-hmm. And these women, in many ways, are showing me how to survive an extremely stressful and confining environment. And so these poems are love letters. I love Black women. Black women have been an integral part of my sustenance in my personal life, my spiritual life, my educational life, my professional life. And I can't imagine living in this current time frame without the lived examples of these women.
Absolutely. And there's one in particular, Lucille Clifton, who is really special to you.
Yes.
And I know that there's a poem that is in honor of her. Could you talk a little bit about that? I think you're going to read from it as well.
I'm going to read from it. Lucille Clifton has a poem entitled Study the Masters. And I dedicated this book to my ancestors, blood relatives, or otherwise. And I wanted to say otherwise to include women that I think influence who I am professionally, spiritually, and personally. And definitely Lucille Clifton is a part of that. So one of my favorite poems from her is entitled Study the Masters. And so I decided to play with Study the Masters and have a type of conversation with Miss Clifton. So this poem is entitled Study the Masters. I do as you say, study the masters. I glean close, your handiwork of words, the discipline you command, all that is huge and hinged with hope are pressed into me. I glean closer, chant you in form and line, recall America, taste the iron musk of her words, the clamor of rickety German and loose Latin always seems to crowd the ear, collect moist in the eye.
Thank you. I love that. So great.
Thanks.
Talk a little bit about the genesis of the book. I know you were writing a novel, or you have been writing a novel, and it's about Black women and girls, I believe, right?
Yes.
And then you came across an academic book that's referenced in the book about that inspired you. And so tell me what happened next.
Okay, so I'm gonna start a little bit before that. So I always jokingly say that this is my first manuscript because I began writing my poetry manuscript around 2001 and thought I had something really good around 2003. And then I began to, massage it, edit it, look for the themes. And a second book started to emerge. And so this is actually a portion of the second book because many of us change over time. I, too, changed over time. when I first started writing poetry, I was very much invested in verse and forms.
Okay.
And rather than enjoy the constraints of forms, I decided to enjoy breaking the constraints later as I was writing poetry. And so this book is a portion of that second book that has been expanded. So in 2008, I entered graduate school, and I was writing about girls that went to prison in Kansas during the 1930s. I was writing a novel. And as a part of my creative research intensive process, I was reading a book by Callie Ann Gross, who works at Rutgers University, entitled Colored Amazons. And I was so moved by the research in the book. And once I finished the book, I think I wrote like 20 poems instantly about the women in the book. And then I realized, like, this is really a thing. And I'm motivated to write about Black women in incarceration because of the increased percentage of Black women who have entered the prison industrial complex.
It's been over like 800%.
Over
right?
800%
Right.
within one decade.
Right.
And if you love Black women, you can't ignore that statistic, right? And so there's a lot of rhetoric about prisons and who's in prisons, and oftentimes we talk about Black men being in prison, and Black men are in prison, but Black women are also in prison, which means that there are a number of children. In America, it's estimated that there are over 2 million children with at least one parent in the prison industrial complex. So, right. So if you love children and you love Black women, you're paying attention to this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting what you say, too, about breaking through these constraints, right? Because that is so much a theme in the book. And this concept around a bound woman, which you call not just like a double entendre, but a multiple entendre. And you write about that also in the preface. And that's also how the book is also organized. And so I wondered if you could talk about that multiple entendre and how you came up with a concept of there being multiple meanings of bound, or why you decided to play with that meaning.
I can't remember exactly how I started playing with the word bound, but initially in the second manuscript, I wanted one word that would talk about the divergent forms and themes that were happening in the book. And I came up with bound because of its multiple entendre. Bound meaning kinship, bound meaning legacy, bound meaning to scribe or to write and to put together or to build a body of work. Bound meaning to fetter, to hold tight, to restrict. And bound, of course, meaning to spring forth and to depart from. And I thought all of that was happening in the book.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, I love how intricately you and sort of seamlessly you go across all these different kinds of terrain. I think for Black women in particular, because there's not just, obviously you're talking about familiar women, but you're also talking about women who are not so familiar.
Right.
You're also talking about your grandmother. You're also talking about Eartha Kitt or Grace Jones, people who are unfettered. I think Claudia Jones is also mentioned as well, and so there are these names and pictures that I think people might not expect to see in the manuscript that are surprising, and then of course there's the poems themselves that are also surprising and beautiful as well. And so I wondered if you could talk about the selection and photos in the book in particular, right? And also, you were inspired, I believe, by Deborah Willis's work in Reimagining the Archive.
Absolutely.
And so I wondered if you could talk about the intention in terms of the pictorial representation or the visual representation of the women that you write about in the book.
Absolutely. So a part of studying the legacy of Black women in the Western world and in the United States is understanding the way that medical racism and eugenics and photography and types of documentary arts were used to reinforce mythological social hierarchies and in many ways demonize black women and frame black women in a particular construct that was often negative. And so it's important for me as an abstractionist, as someone who likes to break constraints, to go into something that is seen, that is thought to be the pinnacle of institutional knowledge, such as the archive, and treat it as my sandbox. And take out the black women that have been confined in that space and put them in a space that actually shows their complexity and shows their humanity outside of that framing.
Right. And there's a way in which in your work or through your work and through these poems and through this collection, you're actually freeing them, right?
Yes.
Like you're
that's
like,
the intention.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's amazing. Yeah, it's so
Thank
good.
you.
There are also some personal aspects that frame the book, because obviously the bulk of the book is around these other women and these other like colored Amazons and other historical figures, people that we lionize, like Assata Shakur comes to mind, of course, General Harriet Tubman. I like to call her General always, first, since she led the Combahee River raid. I wondered if you could talk about the personal part for you. You frame the book both at the very beginning in the preface, but then again at the end, which I think is like very deferential and respectful, and very much in the African American tradition for us in terms of putting our ancestors first, and then we put ourselves after them. But you also mentioned your son and his struggles in this particular political climate, but then I think also as it relates to your history as a U.S. Air Force veteran and your ambivalence in the times that we're in, which you sort of referenced, I think, when we first started talking. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what led you to include that story, why you felt led to do that, and what you feel like it brings to what it adds to the conversation.
Well, I think for many young people that are my son's age, to go from a decade of optimism, hope, humanity, restoration, stability, into this context of hate is a struggle for many. It's a struggle for all of us. But I think particularly to see the vileness of this political and cultural climate for young people that haven't had experience with that before may cause emotional struggle and may cause many to self-medicate in ways that are not healthy. And it's easy to say that the individual is the victim of that, but that's not true.
Right.
The collective community and society is a victim of that.
Absolutely.
And as a mother, it affected me deeply, but I was also very torn because I had been trained to uphold certain values that are now not being valued, being denigrated, being made a mockery of. And so when you are conditioned to be a warrior and it seems like your country is attacking you, then you are faced with a conflict of how to negotiate the space. Do you negotiate it as a patriot? And what does being a patriot mean at that time? Does it mean upholding the values that you took an oath to uphold? Does it mean protecting your family? What does it mean in a time like this? And I think the last chapter in the book explores that, but I also rely a lot on mythological women that have had experience as warriors, as some type of mental and intellectual vitamin, spiritual vitamin, I guess.
Yes, which is really incredibly inspiring.
Thank you.
And I think people will get a lot from that. And so thank you for sharing that. I think it can be really difficult to share intimate details of something like that that's so personal. And so
right. And like, let's be clear. I just want to add this thing. Like,
yes,
I love to write. I love who I am, and I don't mean to essentialize motherhood, but by far, my son is my very best and favorite thing. And so to threaten that is to touch me in a very specific and emotionally shattering way.
Yes.
That is going to evoke a response.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes, 100%. You just made me think about Toni Morrison, and her quote about, you are your best thing, which, of course, I believe comes from Beloved.
Yes.
And but of course, Beloved is about motherhood, and what a mother, the extremes a mother will go to because of the love that she has for her child.
She also has another quote that I love. She says, "A man is just a man, but a son."
Yes.
That's something special.
Yes, and she would know. She would know, right?
Right. She would know.
Okay, well, I have to open it up to other questions from our audience because, it's not just me, thankfully, who gets to ask you questions. People who are excited about your work also want to ask you questions. Cheyenne asks, will the new criminal justice reform be helpful?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We have intentions, we have documents, and then we have actions. Actions will determine whether or not it will be helpful. Enforcement of good policies will let us know if it'll be helpful. Good federal policies intervening on state policies and regulations. Good federal oversight over privatization of incarceration and prison facilities. That would also help.
Absolutely. There's a comment from Kenton. So good to hear you talk about your work.
Hi, bro.
Chris D, do you have any plans for a next project?
I do. I want to continue to work on the novel and to let the novel be in the world. The novel forced me to think about a constrained environment such as a prison and how power is negotiated in the prison, but also specifically to femininity and how women negotiate power in closed environments. We often talk about feminism as a response or a polar opposite of patriarchy. But within the confines of feminist environments and groups, there are other types of negotiations of power. And so that book allows me to explore that through girlhood.
Got it. Becky asks, what is your writing process like?
I vomit on the page and revise a lot. That's all.
That sounds good. It sounds like a good process. Obviously, it works for you. There's a comment from, I might be saying your name wrong, I'm so sorry, Ramika? So excited for this book. Such necessary work. Thank you, DaMaris. George says, you've said that you model a lot of your writing after Toni Morrison's concept of rememory. Interesting. We were just talking about her. Can you talk about that a little bit and about how it ties into A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing?
Okay. So I don't know if this is the right answer, but I'm going to give you the answer that I have right now. So rememory is it's kind of re-envisioning a context of a historical event. But I also want to add that that when you write persona poems, you know, we often say in literary theory that inevitably you're writing about yourself. So I think, you know, in a lot of ways, A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing is a kind of Bildungsroman and a coming-of-age story for me in this time and space. Not that I'm not already an adult, but imagining myself in this historical context, but also in the long legacy of what it means to be a black woman in the United States of America and under such values such as democracy and freedom and voters' rights within this current context.
Lynn asks, has serving in the U.S. Air Force given you any perspective on the subjects you write about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Octavia Butler says anything you touch, you'll change, and anything that touches you changes you. So it's impossible to enter any environment and not be influenced by it. Even if you're influenced negatively, even if it's a visceral reaction that rejects it, you are influenced by it. So of course, the military probably gave me a lot of the discipline that I have towards writing. When I sit down to write, I usually sit down for a minimum of 4 hours. And if I have a long writing day, then I'll shift spaces every 4 hours to ensure my productivity stays high. And I use other methods to ensure that my writing productivity stays high. I write poetry, I write fiction, and I write academic scholarship. So when I'm in those different worlds, discipline is a part of that writing process. And I think a lot of that discipline I learned in the military.
Pia Terrain says, looking forward to doing a deep dive into A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing.
Thanks, Pia.
Sandra asks, what do you do to relax when you aren't writing?
Okay, I'm trying to figure that out. What do I do to relax? I listen to music. I talk to friends. Oh, I'm sorry. I almost omitted this. I almost watch stand-up comedy exclusively when I watch TV.
Have you seen Ellen DeGeneres's?
Not yet.
It's so good.
It's
Relatable.
so good.
Relatable. So funny.
All right, I'll
It's
check
so
it.
good.
I'll
Yes.
definitely check it.
Yes.
But yeah, I write about such macabre topics that laughing is important
Yes.
to keep balance.
Yes. So only stand up. Almost
Predominantly.
exclusively.
Yeah,
Okay.
about 90%.
Okay. And what do we think the other 10% is?
Sometimes dramas and sometimes witty comedic series.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Currently,
Cool.
I'm on The Good Place. I kind of really love that.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that too.
Yeah. It's good.
Excellent, excellent. Have you seen Bird Box? I guess you wouldn't watch that. It's not your thing.
It's not my thing. I'm gonna check in eventually.
Okay, all right.
You know, horror is what I write, not what I watch.
Yes. Well, as long as you don't do the Bird Box challenge, I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
So Laura asks, you mentioned being inspired by Deborah Willis's work in Reimagining the Archive. Could you talk a bit about that here?
What else can I say? You know, Deborah Willis Genius Award. You know, it's important to talk about reimagining the archive 100 or 150 years after the imagining of a visual culture in terms of defining humanity. In this hyper-visual social media world, we are kind of, circling back to that, but it's on an individual basis rather than on a hierarchical basis.
What do you mean?
So one thing that I visited or I've looked into on the academic side is how Google algorithms display Black women's beauty versus how Black women display their own beauty.
Absolutely.
And there is a contrast from what is, let's say, the cultural consensus according to Google's algorithms
Yes.
versus the collective consciousness and memory of Black women.
Right.
when they have their own social media to control their images.
Right.
So that's what I mean about this revisiting and reclaiming the archive has a special significance in this time and place. Whether we acknowledge it or not, social media and the hypervisual culture that we're using via our cell phones, which is another side theory, has become an automated limb and an extension of the body, and another aspect of our identity.
Right.
It creates a particular nexus for us to revisit these ideas of reclaiming the archive and reclaiming the images and how we negotiate the images and what visual power is held in the images that we claim and display. Now, you know, I'm Robin Hood. I take from the institutions and I give it back to the people. But some people are making and generating new images too.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add about that is just that Black women and Black people are some of the predominant users of social media. Right?
Absolutely.
And so, you know, because women are excellent networkers, and especially online, and Black people in particular, we use it both to live tweet, but also just in terms of reifying our own visual and trend-setting work that we've always done. We certainly have used social media in those ways, and so you continue that tradition by also doing this work as well. So,
and I like to think about how social media and Black women's communities is actually extending the currency of gossip that existed from the telephone communities of our grandmothers.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a part of like an extension of the African American oral tradition.
Absolutely.
Which is what my friend scholar Meredith Clark does a lot of work, that work on Twitter, and writes a lot about, but I'm sure there are lots of others who are doing that. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so Nathaniel says, one of your interests is environmental studies. Do you plan on writing anything about the environment in the future? You have a lot of people who know you are asking questions. It's lovely.
Well, I think this is about environmental studies, right? A lot of times in academia, we talk about environmental studies being the relationship with people with the natural space. But I think of environmental studies as being the relationship that people have with natural and constructed spaces. So whether those spaces are digitally constructed or whether they are socially and like urban constructed, it is the same approach that I take to studying human beings in nature. And I think all of the work that I do, that is 21C work or 21st century work, with looking at Black women in digital environments, is environmental memory, is environmental study.
Terry asks, does listening to music inspire you at times?
Absolutely, all of the time. In my novel, each one of my characters is assigned to a different jazz singer. It's how I keep their 12 voices apart.
12 voices. Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing. Alexander, so you watch stand-up comedy too. Any favorite comedians?
Oh, of course. Dave Chappelle, of course.
Dave Chappelle's the
Of
GOAT.
course.
He's the greatest.
GOAT, right?
Greatest.
Richard Pryor is like hashtag goals.
Yes.
And Dave Chappelle is like 99.5 there. Because what Richard Pryor's gift is telling a story. He tells a story so well that you can't tell a Richard Pryor joke. You can't tell it. Because the words and the timing are that precise.
Sure,
that if you want to retell the joke, you can't. You don't have the ability. That's how skilled he is. So hashtag goals.
Okay. Danny, as a creative writing professor, what is the most important lesson you teach your students about writing?
Be brave. Be adventurous. Be brave. That's one of the lessons. And read a lot, even to figure out what you don't like.
Why is it the most important thing to be brave?
Because the anchors, and what makes, I think, what makes creative writing or any writing good is what I call the anchors. And the anchors are the points of honesty and those glimpses where like humanity and circumstance is exposed.
Yeah.
And if you are afraid to address that in your everyday life, you might bring those same inhibitions to the page.
Right.
I've read books like that. And just doesn't produce great writing. Whatever you're
Did you read them? Did you read them like that?
No, I fell asleep in them. Falling asleep.
I read those too.
Yeah.
I think I did the same thing.
Yeah.
Terry asks, what kind of writing do you find hardest? Poetry, books, or songs?
Oh, I don't really write songs, so that would probably be the
If you
hardest.
wrote songs. You're holding out. Like,
Right.
bury the
Poetry.
lead.
Yeah. Yeah. I listen to a lot of music, but I don't write songs.
Okay.
I don't know. They're different skills. But I will say as I get older, it is more difficult to move in between the genres than it used to be. I'm kind of disappointed by that.
Why is that?
I'm just older. Like, you know, I guess the mind doesn't fire in the same way. But like if I'm writing academic work, I can't write fiction for probably a month or two after that because that academic tone will come into the fiction. And I don't like that. I like lyrical fiction.
Right. And so you need some space.
I need some
between
space where I used to didn't really need that much space, but now I need space.
Yeah, I understand that. Jeff asks, what are some books and authors inspiring you right now?
Right now, jeez.
Are you reading? How many books are you reading?
Well, I have a friend's book that I'm going through right now. I just packed up a lot of my books, so I'm not in a bunch of books right now, but I'm in one book of fiction. I'm jumping around different poetry books, and I'm not gonna call any names.
Okay, all right.
In fear I leave other people out.
Okay. Do you have a genre that you prefer to read?
Oh, let's see.
Because it's interesting that you were inspired by a nonfiction book to write poetry. So I'm curious if you...
Well, that's because I'm an abstractionist.
What does that mean?
That means that...
I'm just going to be...
Yeah, whatever way you
gonna
serve
pretend
it
I
to
know.
me, I'm
Right.
going to serve it back to you different.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a part of breaking the constraint.
I got it. Good.
I guess it also depends on the time that I have. So, like, if I'm leaving the house and I have a busy day, I'll probably take a book of poetry with me so I can read the moment and the emotion in between the time. If I'm sitting at home and I know I'm going to be home for days, then I'll open up a fiction book.
Right.
But I will say this live. Poetry books have 20 pages and books of prose have 10. If you don't get me in that time, I don't waste my time. There's a lot of books being printed. No one should subject themselves to literature they don't like.
It's true. That's even a shorter amount than Nancy Pearl, the famous librarian, says. I think she said something like 50, you should give a book 50 pages, I think, was the last time I read that advice, and that must have been like 10 years ago or something that I read that. I don't even remember when that was. So you're you're cutting it off, which is good, because it's 2019, so we just need to be more harsh.
I'm a product of the 21st century.
Yes.
The internet has destroyed my attention span.
You and everybody else. It's not just you. Yeah,
Right.
you're not alone.
Make it worth it.
Yeah, it's true.
Put a book in lipstick. Make it worth it.
Well, well, I mean, I think we're all similar in that way. We all have limited time. So, but that ups the ante both for like writing students and also for writers, because, gives you something to shoot for. Alicia asks, "What's the main impact you want people to leave with from reading your book?"
I want people, one, to think about how they're negotiating their personal space, their civic space, and their community. I also want people to seriously think about what is happening in terms of mass incarceration in our society.
To Black women.
To Black women in general, but specifically to Black women, right? But in general, as a whole, the system is not working well for most of us. 99% of us, and we need to revisit that. And we also need to think about what is happening when Black women are incarcerated.
Absolutely.
And I want people to leave the book with that information too.
Pia asks, while writing A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing, did you encounter emotional barriers?
Absolutely.
If so, how did you overcome those times and press forward in the writing process?
I don't know. I definitely encountered barriers. Some of my helpmates from Bloomsbury are in the room, and I appreciate them. But there were times when I didn't want to go back into the book in its entirety because it affected me emotionally. That sometimes writing these poems would put me in a state of like temporary social paralysis. Like I didn't want to be outside. I just wanted to be with the poems. And there were other times that if I went back into the poems, I wasn't easily going to be able to leave the headspace of the poems.
Understandable. Well, it's been such a pleasure getting to talk to you.
Shonda. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us where to find you on social media and the
Okay.
web, and where we can find your book.
Okay. So the book is available via Amazon, Bloomsbury. I think it's at Target now. If you go to Target's webpage, Barnes & Nobles, and particularly your local booksellers.
Absolutely.
That's the best place to pick it up on January 15th, next Tuesday.
Absolutely.
You can find me on Twitter at DaMaris Hill. You can find me on the web space, DaMarisHill.com. And you can find me on Facebook, DaMaris B. Hill.
And are there any last thoughts you want to leave us with? Anything I didn't ask you about that you think is important to say?
Anybody who pre-ordered the book or intends to order the book or is even going to read one poem, thank you so much for your support and your generosity with your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you.
Bye.